I was struggling a bit to find a topic for today to talk about on this sort of challenge that I'm doing of recording a video every day for this channel while I'm going through the book writing process. And the reason that I had this challenge is like, man, why do I have to oblige myself to hop on this camera and do this? Why did I put myself through this? What's the point? And it sort of took me back to other times in the past where I was like, "Man, why do I have to film a YouTube video? Like, why do I have to make this Instagram post? Why do I have to get on this, call for somebody to join my coaching program? Why do I have to sell somebody something?" Like if it was all up to me, I would just sit here and write and philosophize about life all day and study great minds and then try to see what I find, you know? Um, and so to me, I'm just like, well, why do I have to do all this stuff? Right. And most people nowadays will look at that, and my past self would say this too, of like, dude, you're just being a lazy piece of shit. We all have bills to pay. We all have uh, things that we have to do to contribute to society. Don't be a spoiled little bitch and just like sit here and be lost in your thoughts all day. And part of me still has that idea and that sort of sentiment, and then that makes me feel guilty being like, "Oh, I'm in this blessed position that I could even somewhat make a living off of my ideas. I'm obligated to help people, right?" um, but the thing is this is actually a very modern idea because it's something that's quite ubiquitous. I mean, like, it doesn't matter where on the political spectrum you are, what beliefs you have. If you live in the West, it's a common idea that almost doesn't ever get refuted of saying like, well, you can have your hobbies, you can have your activities, you can be an artist or whatever you want, but you also need to do this thing, contribute to society, pay your bills, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not making necessarily a statement of saying that that's inherently wrong. But what I am saying here in this video, and this is something I've been thinking about for a while, is that the era of great men is over because of that type of thinking. And who knows what the consequences of that will be? Maybe it'll be that we are all more equal. I guess we're more equal in our labor and our suffering, having to live in uh, a world that revolves around money. And in that way, maybe it's liberating, or maybe it could lead to something a bit more nefarious from the standpoint of we're not producing any sort of great men anymore, where we can give them the time to wrestle with their ideas. This is something that Nietzsche talked about. He said that it was sort of in a way, he said it was sort of tragic about how many great minds were lost because they weren't given the opportunity or the right circumstances to be like a genius, you know? And genius doesn't necessarily mean that you are like so much smarter than everybody. It's more a creative genius, I would say. Somebody who does something different that changes a certain medium, whatever art form it might be, and they just kind of like completely reshape how people do things. That's what I think is great. You look in warfare, Napoleon, Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great. Why were they great men? They were great because they completely transformed the landscape of their times, both politically, militarily, and culturally. Um, Napoleon just completely changed Europe with just the fact that he just wanted to conquer the world, right? Um, and in terms of like literature and philosophy, um, people like Nietzsche, he was ar- argue. Now I wouldn't say arguably. I don't even think it's even an argument. I think factually, objectively, he was the most influential philosopher of the 20th century. Although he lived in the 19th century, he inspired so many philosophers and a lot of ideas and stuff that we take for granted today. Um, a lot of famous people or a lot of influential thinkers, they were influenced by him. Even just in the self-improvement space, a book that a lot of people love is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, heavily inspired by Nietzsche. He quotes him all the time in that book. Even something like more contemporary self-help books, anything by like Mark Manson, for example, he's heavily inspired by Nietzsche too. Um, Robert Greene, The 48 Laws of Power, like half the book is quoting Nietzsche, right? And so what Nietzsche had at his disposal, and this is something that he talked about, is the importance of solitude. He took solitude very seriously. He actually considered it a virtue to be able to be in isolation, not have the thoughts of other people or the responsibilities of other people um, kind of weigh you down from discovering truths about life. And then ideally, this is what his character that he kind of speaks through and thus spoke Zarathustra. Zarathustra was up in the mountains for 10 years doing all this stuff, just being in isolation. And then he came down to help to try to teach the masses, right? About what he found. And I mean, he's a perfect example of how much that's important. He did that himself. And the ancient Greeks, they actually had this idea that hard work was stupid. That's kind of a radical way of thinking today. The ancient Greeks, with all of the great things that they created in terms of art, philosophy, science, you think like they were these super hard workers. Well, they thought hard work was for slaves. They actually saw the importance of leisure and just giving yourself time and the space to just you know let the gods sort of speak through you. And the reason that this video is titled "The Era of Great Men is Over" is I almost think it's not like this grand stance on capitalism. That's a bit out of my domain, and honestly, I don't really care about it that much. Of course, I care about it from the standpoint of how it affects the individual, but I don't. I think that's just one thing. I think a bigger thing, a bigger impact that we sort of take for granted is the internet and social media. A lot of people talk about the concerns of all that. I understand, but it's almost like if you're some sort of intellectual or somebody who's trying to make money off of their ideas, not for the sake of making money, but for the sake of making a living, right? For the sake of being able to do this full time and not have to work like 8 hours a day doing some other thing, and then you basically have no energy left to work on the thing, you know? It's basically impossible now to be an original thinker without having a support of an audience, without presenting your ideas to the public before they're even fully formed, because the institutions that used to help with that, aka the universities, that's what they used to be. That's why professors get things like tenure, where they're almost guaranteed to not get fired for their ideas because that sort of thing will kind of corrupt their thoughts and curtail their motivations. Their motivation will be, oh, I'm going to come up with these things so I don't get fired, rather than I'm going to come up with new and original ideas, which are always by definition going to be contentious, right? Because it's a risk to the current norms of whatever field that you're in. But the problem is now is that let's take philosophy for example, or even literature. Um, Universities, it just makes no sense to go to. Put aside all of the political BS and stuff, because again, if tenure was because if tenure existed, which it still does in theory, then that should sort of handle all those things, right? The bigger issue is let's take philosophy as an example. Philosophy, the root words of it is phyla and then Sophia, which means phyla means love, Sophia means wisdom. So it's love of wisdom. I think most people, when you talk about philosophy, they think like, oh, that means something along the lines of wisdom, right? Well, let me ask you this. If you go to a university that costs $50,000 a year, all to just study philosophy, which you can study through books or on the internet in your own time, and you're paying $50,000 for that, is that a wise thing to do? It's almost like automatically the people that have like philosophy degrees, especially in the modern day, they're already like discounted because if they love wisdom so much, they did the most unwise thing you could possibly do. It might not be unwise if there's like a bunch of philosophy jobs out there in the marketplace after you leave school, but of course there's not. The only thing that you have is like uh, being able to be like a philosophy professor or something. And even that's not very lucrative, right? It's not worth it. And so if you're like a public intellectual in any way, or you're just really trying to think of something new or think of new ideas, a new perspective in any field, whatever it might be, you're reliant on the public. You're reliant on, followers to fund you. For me, in my case, one-on-one clients. And I think that's fine and dandy and all. Like somebody like Mozart, for example, he, well, one, he basically died broke, but that's for a whole other thing. But while he was more successful and was making all of his compositions and all that and everything he's known for, he had like one-on-one students, um, just to kind of sustain himself, right? So I'm not saying that that's bad to have these obligations. I think it's good. In my case, I actually get a lot of insights and learn a lot from working with guys one on one, which I then go through my book. And then, a big part, I wouldn't say the whole point, but a big part of what I want to do with my book is to make it a textbook for my clients, right? Um, but yeah, all that to say, it's like, well, the era of great men is over because in order for you to be great, you need to have time, you need to have that solitude, you need to have that space to create something. That's what the Greeks believed. That's why they sort of isolated their intellectual elites, I guess for lack of a better term, to basically live in leisure in order to come up with their ideas. That's why Nietzsche, even though he was basically broke his whole life, he found a way to just isolate himself so that he could write, even though it made sense, like he could make money by teaching at a university, which is a job that he quit, by the way. That's how important it is. And nowadays, I don't think that that's possible. It's not possible just with the economic circumstances. Sure, all of uh, the fact that the institutions that used to be able to provide and help with that, they're all completely commodified. You can't do shit with that, right? There's that barrier to entry. You have to basically be stupid to be able to have the freedom to be smart. Like it's so stupid. Um, and then the alternative, again, like I said, and this is the case for me and for I guess it sounds so pretentious, but for lack of a better term, like a public intellectual um, that are much bigger than me, and there's a lot of them. They have to acquiesce to the demands of their audience in some way in order to sustain themselves, in order to sustain their work. And in a way, that's antithetical to creativity because you're not creating for yourself. You're not really contending with all of your ideas because as soon as you think, oh, my audience isn't going to like this, then you just don't do it anymore. And because of that, because there's all of these sort of environmental material circumstances make it impossible for you to be individualistic without being punished severely, makes it almost impossible for greatness to occur. Greatness meaning something that's so innovative or revolutionary that it just changes the way people think, or basically it kind of redefines the era that you're in culturally, whatever. And it could be very niche subject. It doesn't have to be something that like changes the whole world, but it could be something that really revolutionizes or innovates a certain field that you're in. And I find myself kind of in this trap all the time of like, well, I'm honestly afraid a little bit, dude. Like, I'll be straight up. Like, some of the insights and stuff I'm getting through just studying history and because that's what I mostly do all day when I'm writing. I'm actually doing more of an investigation. I'm investigating the psychology of people in the past, our sort of genealogy, our history, and sort of trying to get an honest assessment of what we're really like as human beings, especially as men. And a lot of the things that I'm finding are not they're very ugly. I'll just put it straight up. And it's just like, because I had this idea of like, well, I want to get, I want to get linked up with a publisher. I don't think I could do that, man. I'm pretty sure those be like, yo, this is dangerous. Like, what are you, like, but it's sort of this resistance that we have to our true natures deep down that we're pretty violent and sadistic creatures if we are really honest with ourselves and our motivations. You look at our chimp ancestors, you look at Homo sapiens, how they basically exterminated the Neanderthals, and then they started exterminating each other. You look at all of history, it's obvious, it's clear, it's there, the evidence is there. But to be able to bring that back and have us realize that that's who we are and then start that off as a foundation, it's a dangerous idea. It's a very dangerous idea. Um, and it's something I'm always nervous to talk about, honestly, because I feel like I'm going to lose my audience. It's part of the reason why I'm talking about these more dangerous ideas here. Uh, I'm just gonna, yeah. I always have this conflict of like how do I how do I soften the blow of this of these truths, because not really anybody else is talking about it. Usually, when they talk about masculinity, they think like masculinity is the rock and femininity is the ocean, and masculinity is all about being stoic. And it's like those are just fantasies, man. Stoicism is great. It helps you not be like this pure animal, but where stoicism messes up is they say that you being stoic is your natural nature, being animalistic is against your nature. So it's actually the opposite. And it's completely the opposite. And you see how things like stoicism have really like caught the attention and of the masses. People really love it, right? It's like when you offer something that's the opposite, which also has all the evidence on its side, by the way, psychologically, people are going to resist it. And if people resist it, they won't follow you. If they don't follow you, they won't support you financially. And so you're incentivized to kind of just go with what's acceptable. And it's not just me. There's other, creative people that feel this way too. And if you're not given the space to be able to actually tell the truth without having tremendous consequences, you're incentivized because to start spouting untruths, especially if you have a family to support. You have to support yourself. You want to actually enjoy life and not live like the broke artist life. Who the hell wants that? you know, I think it's just a compromise that a lot of artists take. Um, yeah, it's just and I'll be straight up. I'm probably going to end up being forced to take some of those compromises myself. Whereas a different era, like the ancient Greeks, they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't have to. They could just tell it as it is because they were given the circumstances to allow that to happen. They also didn't have, this is going to sound extremely elitist to me, but keep in mind, I'm not an aristocrat. I'm definitely not upper class. I'm a commoner. Okay, I'm a commoner like you are. Well, maybe some of you are in the elite class. I don't know, but I'm definitely a commoner. So, but there's something about the fact that everybody is able to have an opinion now on social media that's not good because most people are weak, most people are resentful, and those things guide their entire life. And if that's the case, and on the internet, popularity always wins, it always serves the lowest common denominator. Everything on the internet is progressively going to bring us down more and more and more instead of elevating us up. And part of that is the fact that everybody can have an iPhone now or just a smartphone. Everybody can have an opinion. And if that's the case, and we are instilled from a young age that we should have whole democratic and liberal ideals, majority rules type of stuff. And we also have a culture that encourages popularity, social media that encourages us to gain as many followers and likes as possible, regardless of who they're from. And so it's going to lead humanity, and I think it is, and it has been down a downward spiral. In- Instead of us being creative and making new things and new ideas. I mean, just think about the last 10 years, 2023 compared to 2013. Um, Really not that much different in terms of technology, in terms of the type of stuff people are talking about. But then let's compare 2013 to 2003. 2013 and 2003 were very different times, technologically, especially. Um, but I think in terms of like great pieces of work and stuff as well. Like I'm trying to think in 2003, I'm pretty sure that's when David Foster Wallace wrote The Infinite Jest, which is like a masterpiece. But it was around that era, right? You know, we had the Harry Potter series back then. A lot of these great things that all cultures can kind of really appreciate, or certain cultures like put up saying like, "This is us. This is what we're proud of," right? Like the UK was just like, "Yes, Harry Potter. This is us." Like, you know, Britain. The US probably had something too. I mean, we had a bunch of stuff back then. Well, 2003 wasn't perfect either, but we just sort of see this progressive degradation of quality of works and things that people are proud of. I think that's what's causing a lot of nihilism among young men, especially. There's everybody is that there's nothing to be proud of, right? Can you really be proud to be an American, even if you love the US and you're a patriot like I am? Um, can you really be proud? Like what is there to be proud of, right? And so much of your identity comes from your nationality, your the people that you come from. Like it's tough to be proud about that. It's tough to be proud about yourself. It's difficult. And there's this theory, it's called the great man theory. Nietzsche's accused of having this, and yeah, maybe I have a little bit of it myself, but I think there's good evidence for it. So basically the great man theory is that there's just a select few great men who really push humanity forward across history. You read history books, that's how it's written, right? It just accounts and talks about great men of certain periods of time who moved humanity forward, and everybody else, all the commoners that are living under them, they're like an afterthought. Like nobody's like they don't. I remember history books back in like high school. They try to have like this little section of like what common people were like back then, and then the rest of the time it's like, okay, let's talk about these great men instead because that's the most interesting thing. What great men do we have in 2023? Honestly, where we can like universally say that's a great man? Nobody. Right? Maybe Elon Musk, maybe, but other than him, who? Whereas other eras, there's tons of people that people can say, oh, they were great men of this, And I think part of the reason of that is because everybody has an opinion now on social media, and because everybody has an opinion, you could start people could start spreading. Not I wouldn't just say necessarily saying spreading lies, but they'll start to turn the conversation toward negatives of great people like Elon Musk instead of and turning that attention there and causing controversy there where otherwise if there wasn't such a public square where everybody was involved in the entire world, less people would be talking about him in a bad light. I'm not saying that there's things that you shouldn't criticize about Elon Musk. Of course there are. But the fact that everybody has a voice now sort of makes it impossible for great men who nations and cultures follow to exist. It's just impossible because somebody's going to have a problem with it. And one of those people have a problem with it are going to be charismatic and great themselves. And then they get a following. and then this idea of like, oh, this guy's actually not that great. It grows and grows. And it's like the when you put a bunch of crabs in a pail. I remember my brother and my dad and I did this like 15 years ago. We were at the Outer Banks in North Carolina, and we found a bunch of crabs and put them in a pail, and we tried to get them to fight, but they just started fighting each other. It's really funny. But, anytime a crab would try to get out, like, another crab would just pull him back down, right? That that's kind of what social media is doing now, and it makes greatness almost impossible because greatness necessitates original new ideas, and it necessitates a bunch of people supporting that original new idea. Now instead it's all about like reaction videos and critiquing, people who are trying to really come up with new original ideas and being all skeptical and yeah. I probably sound like a crazy person, but I'm gonna try to write about this more. I'm I'm realizing more and more my ideas are better articulated when writing than speaking. But if you've been watching up to this point, I hope you enjoyed my little diatribe or whatever you want to call it. Just having one of those days. But I really appreciate that I'm able to do what I do, even if it's a very modest living. And even more than that, I'm appreciative that I have a purpose, and I actually have pride in myself and what I do. And that's the thing that keeps me from going nihilistic. And I think if I'm trying to give value to you, the viewer here, the tens of you that watch this, um, if you feel nihilistic and sad, and you just feel life is kind of pointless, like what's the point of me doing all this, right? It's becoming quite a common thing. Think of yourself, ask yourself if you're proud of yourself, if you have pride in who you are, and maybe even in you just being a collective part of something. And I think that'll tell you a lot about why you're not feeling so good. This society, the modernity, Christianity actually, um, kind of teaches you that pride is not good. And I think that does a tremendous disservice because pride is the thing that keeps you from being nihilistic. I don't think the goal should be pride for its own sake, but it's almost sort of like a symptom of being psychologically healthy is that you're proud. Proud of your family, proud of yourself, proud of your accomplishments or whatever. Proud of what you believe in. So yeah. Well, I covered a lot of topics on the video, but I'm just gonna post it as is. Hope you enjoyed that little rant. I'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye.